welcome. It's unclear whether I should say good morning or good evening or good night, depending on where you may be. But we're more than happy to have all of you join us this evening for this WebinART, and especially to begin it with a quote from Shoji Hamada. The root may be firmly planted in tradition, but when it buds, when it branches out on the surface, it must be fresh and new. After reading this quote in Soetsu Yanagi's book, The Unknown Craftsman, we decided to title this exhibition, Root and Branches, 3 Generations of the Hamada Family. Together with Yanagi and Kawai Kanjiro, Shoji Hamada fashioned the Mingei movement, known as the art of the people, which has inspired potters in Japan and all around the world. Harkening back to the idea that art is in its essence an elemental and direct representation of our humanness, these makers created work that simply and clearly reflected another Japanese notion, that of yonobi, or the beauty of use. Essentially, function and form needed to be present in every work. And each work should be not only appreciated for its beauty, but also for its use. Our journey to the Hamada family began in the early 1980s, when we first began sharing the ceramic art of Brother Thomas, who also acted as our teacher and guide into the world of clay. Linda Baglin, who owned Art Asia in Cambridge, had created a deep friendship with Tatsuzo Shimaoka, who was a disciple of Shoji Hamada. After her gallery closed, she was offered works by Shimaoka and then directed them to us. I turned to Brother Thomas, who exclaimed, "If ever you have a chance to show his art, you should." Thus began our working relationship with the master, who in turn directed us to the work of Ken Matsuzaki, who then in turn directed us to the work of Yoshinori Hagiwara. All of this was at the very beginning and was begun by the master Shoji Hamada, who was designated a living national treasure in 1955. Eventually we met Tomoo, who is the grandson of Shoji, and Koi Isaka, who is the family representative. Together we have been able to present 7 exhibitions of the 3 generations. Today we have a superb body of the 3 artists' works. Shoji, who died in 1978, Shinsaku, who is now 90, and Tomoo, the grandson, who is 54 and with us this evening. Brother Thomas's wisdom seems appropriate. He wrote, "What is old and beautiful is always new, and what is beautiful and new is always old." Along the way, Koi-san has remained the link for us to the family. It's been a great joy and privilege working together with him. We've been able to rely upon him, and he is a very valuable and connection between the past and the present and the past. Today, Tomoo and Koi will take us on a tour of the Hamada compound. Then, guided by Professor Andrew Maske, we will explore questions of tradition and how to find new creativity within the definitions of Mingei. Andrew has become a frequent and effective guide into the world of clay. It seems that no pot goes unnoticed by Andrew, and he is uniquely knowledgeable about each pot as it's in its presence within traditional world and the present universe. So Andrew, thank you so much for joining us as well. Let me close with another quote from Thomas. "Perhaps we are made to look back just for the experience of being amazed as much by what we have done as by what we can still do." This evening is an example of what we can still do, honor the tradition and the pottery of 3 amazing generations of the Hamada family. Let me now turn it over to Koi, and then Koi, you and Tomoo will take us on a tour and we'll begin the evening. Thank you all for being here.
And right before we do that, we're gonna just do a brief video, which Koi, thank you for putting together, which shows both the museum and a bit of Tomu's process in his studio. And I'll just read the translated transcript of sort of what's happening in each scene. So here we have Tomu throwing a big plate using a kick wheel and making a wave form on the edge.
Cool.
まあこれは大きな大皿を作ってるところです。これは上り窯ですね。上り窯を焼いてるところですね。
This is the climbing kiln, and the previous picture was that he was making a big plate on the wheel.
So this is still the climbing kiln, and inside you can see the fire through a spy hole, which you'll see briefly here. Here, Tomu is firing a salt glaze kiln. He's taking test pieces out of the kiln and placing them on this brick. You can see them cooling off. With the firing of a salt kiln, he inserts salt with a piece of bamboo that's been cut in half. One person is in charge of 2 firing holes. 4 people simultaneously insert the salt, which means salt is inserted through 8 different holes. The total amount of salt inserted in this kiln is approximately 132 pounds. Here there are craftsmen at the Hamada kiln, and they're using kick wheels as they trim pieces. This is the first building of the Shoji Hamada Memorial Mashiko Sankokan Museum. The museum is having a special exhibit of Bernard Leach and Shoji Hamada. It also shows old British slipware and old pottery of China, which inspired Leach and Hamada. This exhibition started on June 12th. And then we're taken into the second building, which includes Shoji Hamada's collection that focuses more on Eastern European pottery. The third building is Shoji Hamada's collection of Asian pieces. The Shoji Hamada building has his pieces and drafts all related to Mingei pieces. The fourth building, which was Shoji Hamada's villa, this building was used as Shoji Hamada's guest house and collection house before the museum was founded in 1978. the former studio of Hamada Kiln, which was used by Shoji Hamada. Shoji Hamada used a hand wheel. Shinsaku Hamada, Shoji's son, and his apprentices used kick wheels. Since Tomoo was a child, he played with clay and painted next to his grandfather and father. This is a climbing kiln, Akei kiln, salt kiln. This climbing kiln is Mashiko's special giant kiln. Akei is a method Shoji Hamada learned in Kyoto before he went to Britain with Leech almost 100 years ago. Salt kiln was built by Shoji Hamada in 1954, the first salt kiln in Japan. When he visited Germany, he learned about salt glazes after he returned and tried salt glazing firing in Mashiko. And there you have it.
Thank you so much for that introduction. Koi, do you want to begin with a little background to say your relationship to the family, how you founded your gallery and how you worked together with Tomoo and Shinsaku?
Yeah, okay, yeah. Hello. Good morning or good evening. Yeah, it's just 8:10 in Tokyo, so we are in the morning. And the relationship between the Hamada family and me started nearly about 20 years ago. And I'm running a gallery in Tokyo, and I have been having Tomoo's exhibitions here also for nearly 20 years. And my first visit to Boston was in 2007, so 14 years ago. And also the first exhibition of the Hamada Three Generations was held in 2009. And since then, Tomoo and I started visiting Boston together every other year. So until a couple of years ago, we visited Boston together, so probably 6 times. And this is the 7th exhibition of the Hamada Three Generations. So we were to be there at this time, but sadly, because of the COVID, we cannot come to Boston this time. So we are joining this virtual lecture from Japan. I'm from Tokyo, and also Tomoo is speaking from Mashiko. So, and we hope to come back to Boston in a couple of years and hope to see some of the audience in person in 2 years' time. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. We certainly hope that that will be the case. I think you have to also give full disclosure that we try to schedule the exhibition openings around the Red Sox game, so
Yeah.
that you can at least enjoy the baseball.
Yeah, okay, yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Well, baseball is a passion, certainly in Japan and certainly in Boston.
Yeah, and
Andrew?
also I used to play hockey.
Oh my God.
Yeah, but hockey is not happening in June, unfortunately. But yeah.
Right, that's very true. Nor is it happening this June in Boston because they got eliminated from the Stanley Cup. Andrew, do you want to sort of begin our discussion and viewing of the work, and then include Tomoo if you'd like?
Sure. Actually, I wanted to ask a question related to the video. It was interesting to see the salt firing going on. Salt firing did not exist in Japan until Shoji Hamada began doing it after having been to Great Britain. But I wanted to ask Tomoo if that is truly salt firing. In this country and many other places, they've changed to soda firing, which gives a similar sort of result in appearance, but is a little bit safer than salt firing. Is that where does the salt come from? Is another question I had. Is it actually salt, and where does the salt come from? Mugi, if you could.
簡単に翻訳させていただきますと、 塩釜というのは、庄司浜田さんが日本にお作りになるまで全く存在しなかったというものなんですけれども、今も実際に塩を使っていらっしゃるのでしょうか。こちらの方では塩ではなくソーダを使って、多分その同じような結果が出て安全性も、より少しは高いということで、ソーダに移行するケースがほとんどなんですけれども、まだ本当のお塩を使っていらっしゃるのか。で、もしそうであれば、そのお塩はどこから来たお塩を使っていらっしゃるのかというのが質問です。
はい。塩を使う塩油、これは、ストーリーとしては、浜田庄司が1950年代に、ドイツへ行って、学んできた技法であって、それを日本では初めて、使ったということなんですね。例外としては、常滑焼きというのが愛知県にありまして、沿岸、海の近くで焼いてますので、ちょっと塩分を含んだ、素材があって、ちょっと塩油に近い効果を時々出す、そういう窯元もあります。
Up to that, I'll just translate. The salt kiln is actually Hamada Shoji learned in the 1950s when he went to Germany, and he learned this when he brought it back to Japan. So this is the first time that in Japan has salt kiln. And one of the exceptions is that there's another kiln. It's not really a salt kiln, but it's close to the ocean. So you can say it's sort of a salt glaze because of the air has everything is sort of a salt involved, so that sometimes the result will be similar to what you use a salt kiln.
常滑焼きでは、それを塩油とか、ソードキルンとかいう話ではなくて、たまたま塩分を含んでたという、そういう話でありますね。
Well, in this case, it's not they don't call it particularly salt glaze because they just happen to have lots of salt containing in the material. That is why they have the similar result, but they don't call it especially salt glaze there.
はい。で、アンドリューさんがご指摘の通り、ソルトキルンは非常に焼くのが大変です。それで、結果的により合理的な焼き方としてソーダグレイズが開発された、20世紀になってアメリカで開発された新しい焼き方ですよね。
Of course, as Professor pointed out, salt kiln is a very difficult kiln to handle, and it's very hard to have a good fire. That's why most of the cases that they moved from salt to soda kiln, and that was especially developed in the States because it's much more rationalized than salt kiln.
私としてはより合理的なソーダグレイズよりはドイツの17世紀、16世紀、17世紀でしたかね、から始まっているその塩油の歴史に、敬意を表したいということと、それに浜田庄司が関心を示したというその歴史的な伝統ですかね、伝統を大切にしたいと、その理由で、ドイツ由来の塩油をソーダ油ではなくて塩油の方にこだわりたいと思っています。
Well, for me, in rather moving to a more rationalized method like soda, I would like to emphasize the importance of the 17th century German techniques that Hamada show such interest, and then brought it back to Japan. This is, for me, it is a tradition to use salt glaze and not soda glaze. And that I like to emphasize the importance for me to stick to salt glaze.
ちょうどこれもソルトグレイズですね。
This is salt glaze also.
中はビールじゃなくてミネラルウォーターが入ってます。
It's not beer inside, it's mineral water.
Well,
今朝なので、ビー
It's
ルという
because
気
it's
分ではない。
morning. I can't even drink beer in the morning.
My other
ですね
excuse me, just my recollection also, Tomoo, was that you told us that after the 211 tsunami and earthquake, that the first kiln that was rebuilt and then was fired first was your salt glaze kiln. So it's another affirmation of how important the salt glaze tradition is for you and for your family.
震災の後で初めて、震災の後、ダメージがあって初めて、再築なさって、火を入れたのが、塩釜であるということで、そういう意味もお持ちになっているのではないでしょうかということです。
はい。2011年に、大震災、益子もかなりの被災をしまして、窯が壊れたりしました。それから1年後に園遊のソートキルンは建て直しました。
Also, as people know, the 2011, the big earthquake also damaged many kilns in Mashiko. But after a year, we rebuilt the salt kiln there.
当時はとにかく窯がなければ陶芸家は仕事ができないので、なんとかして窯を直したいという、
Of course, that time we could not work at all without any kilns. So this is our urgent purpose, just to rebuild any kind of kiln to work.
あと先ほどのアンドリューさんの質問で最後に答えてなかった塩を何の塩を使ってるかという質問なんですけれども、益子には5、6人園遊の作家がいます。みんな同じ店から益子の陶芸材料を買う店から買ってますが、その塩は海水塩ですね。
About the questions this professor asked, that what sort of salt that we use. We in Mashiko, we have 5 or 6 salt glaze manufacturer, and they use sea water to make salt glaze, and then we purchase salt glaze from them.
オーストラリアのシャークベイっていう港で取れた塩だと書いてあります。
Since they have it in, they have the salt is coming from Australia. 何ベイですかね？
シャークベイ、シャーク。
Shark
サメ
Bay.
シャークベイ。
Shark Bay, like in Australia, there's a salt coming from the area in Australia.
ちょっと話が違うんですけど、益子とかさまざまなお店で日本製の塩を買うことができるんですけれども、有名なブランドの日本の名前の書いてある塩なんですけれども、その裏側を見ると、その塩の原産国がオーストラリアのシャークベイって書いてあるものが多いです。
Just for the anecdote, in Mashiko, we can purchase salt, and it says that brand salt that made in Japan. There are several places that produce salt in Japan, but if you look at it closely, sometimes it says Shark Bay, Australia, even though it says brand of Japanese manufacturer.
浜田窯でもマシコソルトっていう商品でそのパッケージを美しい民芸スタイルのパッケージにすればその塩を売ることができるかもしれませんね。
We might be able to sell this beautiful with salt with beautiful Mashiko style packages, and then maybe I should start selling those salts in Mashiko. Could be a good idea.
I think basically we should stick to the pottery right now. Andrew, do you want to sort of move us back to the work itself?
Sure, absolutely. And we can see some salt glaze pieces among the works that we'll be looking at. So this is not one, but this shows one of Shoji's very popular motifs. Although it's rendered sideways in a wax resist. So the white part was painted in wax and then glazed. So the black glaze adhered where there was not wax, and the painted motif remained. This is, I believe, one of Shoji's sugarcane motifs, but I will demur to Koi Isaka-san if that's the case.
Yes, yeah, and I think that is a motif from the sugarcane.
So it's Hamada's best known motif. And we can see several examples of that motif in the selections that we're seeing tonight. There's another one.
Before you go too fast, if you could go back, Rose, for 1 second. Of all the pieces that we've had of Shoji over the close to 20 years now, this piece feels the most welcoming to your hands. The shape of it is so beautiful. We've never had a piece in this same shape. We've had a number of the pieces that we'll see replicated in many different forms, and the decoration distinguishes them. And this piece, we just learned recently, was gifted to a potter in New York, who in turn gifted it to Malcolm Wright, the American potter from Vermont, who in turn, when he ended his active career as a potter, put a few pieces that he had owned and had been very important to him in auction. And that's how we ended up with it. And when he saw it in the catalog, he got in touch with us and he said, that was mine for a little while. So it was a really nice sort of lineage or provenance on a piece that obviously had traveled quite a long distance and through many hands to finally end up. And the woman for who he gave it to, or who owned it, just had her work shown at the Metropolitan Museum as part of the collection that was just donated there. Sorry, that was just kind of a footnote that we got recently, and I think it adds, in a sense, to the fact that these items have their own stories as well.
Yes, and that fits very well with the theme of this exhibition. You know, the lineage. The lineage is not just grandfather to father to son, but it's also the objects which pass from person to person and are loved and cherished, and then move on to the next owner.
So let's look at the next slide. That's it. Yeah.
Yeah, very beautiful yet simple vase with a brushed slip background, and that sugarcane motif. And it's been said that specialists who have seen many Hamada Shoji pots can sort of trace the development of his sugarcane motif over the decades in which he used it.
Wow. So this is, you go ahead, Andrew, and then I'll mention something about the decades.
So we see that same motif here on this flask that has a dripped glaze decoration in white, and then a painted decoration in 2 shades of iron brown.
And every side is decorated on this piece. So that one of the nicest aspects is to turn it and end up with literally 4 different calligraphed paintings, if you will, with a sense of freshness and spontaneity. that really is extraordinary. I mean, I don't know whether he did, I don't know how many pieces he did or how many he decorated, but to maintain a freshness in the design itself, which repeats itself quite often, is rather extraordinary. You have to have that built into your almost your DNA to be able to do it with such apparent ease. There's a wonderful documentary film of he and Leach done, I think in 1977, where he's just there sitting, decorating one pot after another. And it is almost a joyous act.
One of the interesting things to me about this motif is that it is that Hamada encountered it in Okinawa. So sugarcane is not raised generally in the main part of Japan, but it is in Okinawa, and I believe that he encountered sugarcane there and created this motif from his experience in Okinawa. Could we ask Tomo if that is correct or not, Mugi?
沖縄、内地の方では、サトウキビがあまり作られてないようなんですが、浜田庄司さんは、このサトウキビのモチーフのこのサトウキビには沖縄で巡り合わったということでよろしいんでしょうか。
そうですね。約100年ぐらい前、沖縄でも浜田庄司は陶芸活動をしていまして、新垣キルン、新垣窯という名門の窯で、そこで作陶してたんですが、そこの、いわゆる、なんでしょうね、アパートみたいな住まいですかね。住まいの目の前はサトウキビ畑が広がっていたということだそうです。
Hamada Shoji actually, about 100 years ago, he was in Okinawa and making pottery there. There was a famous kiln called Aragaki Kiln there, and that's where he was making pottery. And where in front of the apartment where he was living at that point, there are big sugarcane field in front of the apartment. So that's how he encountered sugarcane.
That's great. Andrew, this is kind of what I guess one would call a plate of sugarcane.
Yes. Yeah, multiple motifs. And it's really fascinating to look at multiple renderings by Shoji of the sugarcane. And this is a great example of one that you can see multiple versions all at the same time because they're spread throughout the plate. And this is another of those wax relief designs.
And this is then the persimmon and the temoku at the same time, the iron that he's using.
Yes. The difference between temoku and kaki, or the persimmon glaze, is basically the ratio of iron to ash in the glaze. So that's how you can, when you sort of spread it over unevenly, you can get the variations that you see here, but the materials are the same. It's just the ratio and how they interact in the particular area of the piece.
As I'm looking at it, what is it, 13 inches square? It could be a canvas that is 13 feet square. There is such a dynamic energy in the piece itself that although it is relatively small scale, the energy is enormous. And it's just, again, the combination I said before of function and form. To be able to even hold or use a piece like that as having a part of your world must be an enormous gift. I mean, having it in the gallery is an enormous pleasure, but to have been able to create that, and as we'll see through the next one as well, there is a consistent energy that comes through in virtually every piece that I think we have of his.
Yeah, this is a wonderful piece, and perhaps one of the certainly one of the more complicated shapes that Shoji made. And it also shows his overglaze enamel technique. And maybe Tomoo could tell us a little bit about the overglaze Akae technique and what it meant to Shoji, how he began using it, and how it has continued to play an important role in the subsequent generations.
今のこの赤絵なんですけれども、これを浜田庄司先生がどのようにしてお使いになるようになったのか、そしてこれがどのようにしてその浜田家のその非常に重要な要素になって、代々受け継がれていくようになったのかについてちょっとお話しいただきたいと思います。
そうですね。この赤絵のテクニックは、その浜田庄司が沖縄で、陶芸を始める前の約110年ぐらい前ですかね、京都で、陶芸の技師として研究活動していたときに赤絵の研究もしました。
The Akai technique that Hamada Shoji obtained was before he went to Okinawa. So probably 110 years ago, he was in Kyoto studying Akai and then other pottery techniques there. And then that's how he met this Akai technique.
この赤絵のテクニックというのは、釜焼きが1回増えるということで、時間も、芸術的な手間もかかります。
So Akai technique requires one more time firing, so it takes longer, and it requires some technique other than just a regular pottery.
重要なことは、浜田庄司は民芸ムーブメントのリーダーの一人でありましたけれども、自らの作品に関してはその民芸ムーブメントそのものではなくて、民芸ムーブメントの良い部分を制作に生かしながら、複雑で芸術的に非常に手間のかかるこの赤絵などの仕事も、その民芸ムーブメントの良いところとその非常にアーティスティックな赤絵のテクニックなどと合わせるところでまた新しい益子焼きを作り出したということになります。
So what is important here is that even though Hamada Shoji was regarded as the leader of the Mingei movement, his own pieces reflect not just the Mingei movement, but he sort of picked up the interesting part of the Mingei movement and combined with very artistic technique like Akai technique and created a completely new pieces and new tradition there.
Thank you. Yet another piece with the satokibi, or the sugarcane motif, with a very strong kaki or persimmon glaze background, a vase. And vases, of course, are made mainly for display of flowers. So they're somewhat less utilitarian than other items used in the kitchen or the table or that sort of thing. But as Tomoo just said, that was what Shoji was interested in, not simply reproducing Mingei, but taking the aspects that he was attracted to in Mingei and making new types of ceramics for the purposes that he imagined for them, not sticking simply to tradition or convention.
And as a Westerner viewing this piece particularly, it has the elegance of a human form. It is not that tall, but there still is a sense of grace to it. And then the decoration, and it's probably on the other side as well, adds a kind of element of intrigue and surface energy, but the richness of the kake, of the persimmon glaze in this, and even the roundness of the lip gives it a fullness that says, please put flowers in me. I mean, there is a kind of generosity in the openness, because the next piece we'll look at has a very small opening, a totally different technique, but again, a much more difficult vase to use.
Yeah, this is a wonderfully dynamic or dynamically decorated piece. And generally, I guess these were considered to be flasks or bottles, though even using them as a flask might be a little challenging, just because this is 9 inches high, so you could handle it, but sometimes they're larger and would be difficult to handle. So I believe all of Shoji's pieces, and in fact those of Shinsaku and Tomoo as well, are vessels and things that do have a use. They're not abstract forms or sculpture or that sort of thing. But there's not an overabundance of concern about whether they must be used or actually should be used. They exist well with flowers, they exist well if they're used, when they're used, but also they have presence to the degree that they stand on their own as beautiful objects, which is really the true test of great ceramics.
That's a lovely insight. I just one more thing about the previous piece, Rose, if we could. It looks like an extraordinary abstract painting. So if we were again to blow this up and have it 3 or 4 feet, you would say, wow, that's an energy field. Look at the texture, look at the line, look at the energy that it was. So it's a very strange moment for me to see it on screen like this, because I've seen the piece, but then to say, wow, if that were, 8 feet by 10 feet, and we had a different kind of name on it, like Jackson Pollock, people would be thrilled. But to have that energy in such a small vessel form is really a delight. And seeing it on the screen this way makes it even more apparent, at least to me. The next slide goes back to the same form we just saw. And maybe, Andrew, you could talk a bit about, complexity and then simplicity.
Yeah, it's interesting how Shoji deconstructed and analyzed in advance his pieces, how he decided to decorate them, to form them first, but also particularly to decorate each one. I mean, he one never gets a sense in looking at his pieces that he was ever on autopilot, that you just do this because you're churning them out. He seems to have always been thinking about that particular piece and that was in his hand at the time. Although to watch him, he looks so casual in the video footage that you see, it sort of hides or obscures the mental process that clearly, when you see the finished pieces, had to have been going on in his brain as he was decorating each individual piece. And you certainly see that here. This is really quite sophisticated and dynamic, because it's quite a complicated form to decorate in this manner for sure.
Do you want to speak a bit about the Katakuchi, because it's a form I love, and we've had works by Shimoka as well as by Ken Matsuzaki taking this form and then expanding it, and in Ken's case, also changing the form generally. But we've had both Hamada and Shimaoka dealing with the same traditional form for pouring sake.
Well, this is very a basic form in Japan, and it can be used for pouring sake. But really, I think more often they were used for transferring liquids from large vats or jars to smaller vessels that would be used at the table. So this would transfer soy sauce from a vat into a bottle, but it could also be used at the table if need be. So this is a very utilitarian, very practical piece. They still can be found in Japanese kitchens today in slightly different form. But it's something that, so it's both a bowl and a pitcher. It's both a holding container and a serving container. So it's very versatile in that way, in a way that sort of we don't generally have in our kitchens.
So this is a nice kind of transitional piece. It's a small piece of Bernard Leach's. We've had maybe 6 or 8 pieces over the tenure of our ceramic collection. This is from a collection in the Midwest where someone collected it. And I just thought it'd be nice for people to see at least a piece of Leach's, since his relationship with Shoji Hamada was really a very important one.
Yes.
Did Tomo, did you have any engagement with Leach at all?
リーチさんに関しましては、どのようなつながりをお持ちでいらっしゃいますでしょうか。
リーチさん、それからリーチファミリーと浜田ファミリーは、その初代のバーナード・リーチ、浜田庄司から、その孫である私や、ジョン・リーチ、サイモン・リーチ、フィリップ・リーチさんなど、今も家族付き合いを親しくしています。
As you know that Hamada Shoji and Bernard Leach had quite close relationship, but not just them, but there's grandchildren, like including me, myself, and John and Simon and Phillips. We are very closely connected even now, and we have family friends, and so we have get together as families still now.
バーナード・リーチさんの果たした役割というのは非常に大きかったと思います。
The Bernard Leach's role was very, very big and important in Japan.
民芸運動を日本の国内で行っていたときに、その彼が時々日本に来ることによって、非常に良いバランスが保たれると思います。
So where the Mingei movement was happening in Japan, within Japan, Bernard Leach came to Japan occasionally, and then that would sort of create a very good balance.
イギリスとか西洋や非常にインターナショナルな文化や情報を日本に来るたびに彼は持ってきてくれます。
So Leach brought not just the British information and Western European information, that international information. He brought those to Japan to let us know what's going on.
日本においてはやはり仏教とかそういった宗教的な東洋的な思想というのがやはりどんな人にでもあると思うんですが、そこにその西洋人であるバーナード・リーチの非常に合理的なというか、西洋的なその思想が入るということが非常に 民芸運動のグループの中には良い刺激が生まれたと思います。
So in Japan, our life is based on some elements of religion, the Buddhism, and for Eastern way of thinking, philosophy in our lives. But then Leach brought more sort of rationalized or maybe more westernized way of thinking. And then that actually brought so much stimulation into the Mingei movement in Japan.
それからその日本で行っている民芸運動や、益子焼などのさまざまな日本の文化をですね、西洋の諸国に、バーナード・リーチが、広めた、彼の、何冊かの著書や彼の活動で、非常に益子焼、それから日本の陶芸や工芸などが世界中に広まったのはバーナード・リーチの力によるところが多いと思います。
And then also, Leach actually brought back the information of Mashiko and Mingei and all those things, Japanese culture back into the Western world, and then he was the media to spread it into the Western world, and then that was a very, very important contribution for us, for Japanese Mingei movement.
そうですね、はい。あと、バーナード・リーチの作品に対する、私の意見なんですけども、大変東洋的なセンスがありますが、一番彼の作品から見えてくるものはやはり中国の文化ですね。チャイニーズなテクニックや風景などがよく見ることができます。
My personal thought on Leach's pieces is that it seems that he had a very, very Eastern way of seeing the world. But what I see in his pieces is it's a Chinese culture and a Chinese technique. That's what I could see through his pieces.
彼らが描く山の絵とか建物の絵などは、その風景に、中国の風景を重ねることができます。
So, for example, if you see his picture, the painting of mountains or buildings or houses, you can see the Chinese culture there. You can see the Chinese influence in there.
彼は香港で生まれてますので、やはり本質的に中国に対する憧れは一生持っていたのだと思います。
Well, since he was born in Hong Kong, I think he kept having a sort of love and the longest feeling toward China most of his life.
私はとてもバーナード・リーチさん、それからバーナード・リーチの作品が大変好きです。
I really love him and his pieces very much.
So let's now move on to Shinsaku's work if we can. And Andrew, do you want to create a kind of introduction and then ask Tomoo to share a perspective on Shoji-san and his father's work as a generation and generation, and then we'll talk about Tomoo's work as the third generation.
Yeah, thinking about Shinsaku san as following his father, it couldn't have been easy, especially after his father began to become famous, because inevitably there will be expectations, but also expectations that one will follow in one's father's footsteps, and that and a very critical eye about whether you are imitating your father or doing something new, or continuing the family tradition or breaking with family tradition. So that's had to have been a difficult thing. One thing that becomes apparent very readily in looking at Shinsaku's work is first his really fine potting. He was famed as a tremendously skillful and rapid potter early in his life, and then continuing, of course, through his life. But he also had a distinctive motif, which we see here on this pot, which to me, it always reminds me of a backwards Japanese character mu. There's a character pronounced mu that this sort of resembles, but it's not a Japanese character. And I wondered if Tomoo could tell us about this red motif, what it means or stands for in so much of Shinsaku-san's work.
この新作様の作品なんですけど、この赤のモチーフですね。これ、教授はなんか無をこうひっくり返したような、でも無ではないということなんですけども、これについて何かご存知でいらっしゃいますでしょうか。
そうですね。日本の、カタカナという文字のスタイルの無に似てるんじゃないかというふうに多くの方が言っておりますが、この模様、デザインが生まれたのは、1960年代でしたかね。浜田庄司がアメリカ、それからアメリカのいろんな大学で陶芸のワークショップをしました。そのアシスタントで、父の新作も同行しています。
Many people say this motif is katakana character mu, or resemble to some sort of resemblance with katakana of mu character. However, this was born when he went to when Shoji Hamada went to America in the 1960s to have workshops in several different universities, and my father Shinsaku also went with him.
当時、アメリカのさまざまな大学などで、陶芸のワークショップを行いまして、今でいう有名なアメリカの陶芸家の方々もたくさん、その頃若い学生で、多くの方が浜田庄司のワークショップを見に行きました。非常にアメリカでの仕事は成功しましたけれども、およそ10ヶ月ぐらいアメリカに滞在して、その後メキシコとスペインに移動します。
So Hamada Shoji and then Shinsaku actually had held so many different workshops, and more current famous potters in America, actually when they were young students back then, participate of these workshops. So we could say that workshop was very successful there. And then after 10 months of staying in America, he moved to Mexico and then Spain.
浜田庄司はメキシコとスペインで、それぞれの国の民芸品をたくさん購入して、日本の東京の三越百貨店で、大スペインメキシコ展という展覧会を開催しました。
So Hamada purchased many different local and traditional pieces in Mexico and Spain. And after he came back to Japan, he held exhibit called in Mitsukoshi department in Tokyo, and then Spanish and Mexican exhibition that's called.
で、そのスペインからイギリスに移動するんですけれども、その時リーチポタリー、戦隊部のリーチポタリーにも行くんですけれども、その途中でエジプト にも立ち寄っています。
So when he moved from Spain, he went to Britain to see Leeds Potter studio, but in between he dropped by in Egypt.
で、もちろんずっと10ヶ月以上、浜田新作もアシスタントで同行していまして、でエジプトでそのアラビア文字の美しさを感じました。
When Shinsaku also was traveling along with his father, Shoji Hamada, but when they went to Egypt, Shinsaku really was impressed by the beauty of Arabian letters.
その中にちょっと英語でいうところの W みたいな造形の文字が一文字ありました。
And then there was one letter in Arabic that looks a little bit like W in alphabet English.
その形がとても気に入って、それを浜田新作40歳ぐらいから、今も92歳で元気に、生活していますけれども、約50年以上この W に近い文字を描き続けています。
So he really loved the shape of this Arabian letter, looks a little bit like W. So that was when Shinsaku was around 40 years old. He is now 92 years old and he's still energetic, and then he's living very well. But he's been using this Arabic letter for over 50 years.
はい、この文字に対する意味は考えていなくて、非常にこの形が美しくて気に入ったことで、描き続けているということです。
He doesn't really have he doesn't have any feeling toward the meaning of this particular letter, but he loves the shape of this letter, the beauty of this letter.
浜田庄司にはそのシュガーケインの模様というのが代表的なので、自分でもその代表的な模様、デザインを何か作りたいという、そういう気持ちがあったんだと思います。
I believe that since Shoji Hamada had this sort of a typical Shoji Hamada motif, which is the sugarcane, but Shinsaku also wanted to have some sort of like a representative shape. This is what he found, the Arabic letter.
I just
バ
had
ー
Rose.
ナードリーチにもZ ボールという Z の文字を模様にしたボールがありますので、そういったさまざまな英語でもアラビアでも日本でもそうですけども、文字というのは一つの模様になる可能性はあると思いますね。
Even the Leech has this, it's called Z ball, that the alphabet Z had the motif in this ball. So anywhere, whichever letters, it could be Japanese or could be Arabic or could be English, but letters can be also the motif of this pieces in a pottery.
I asked Rose to put this on the screen to have a contrast because both of them have the wonderful sort of background hakame form, brushstroke behind it, and then to see the decoration of both the father and the son, I think is really a kind of a wonderful contrast. Even the use of the circles, Andrew, in this one, that create a kind of visual frame for it. The other one's free floating, so that they express themselves very differently or personally, and yet the form is not much different, but the experience of viewing each of them is incredibly different.
There's a beautiful example of the contrasting white and black glazes that first seems to have appeared in Japan in the late 16th or early 17th century in southern Japan at a kiln group called Karatsu. but here it's rendered on a faceted jar, which it never really was in the original form. So it takes a Hamada form and uses a traditional glaze composition on it.
And there are a couple of pieces of shoji in the exhibition where you have the combination of the Nuka glaze over the temoku, and very different. The other are square bottle forms. But again, there's a kind of subtle dynamic that's created by the freedom with which the glaze itself just overlays one on the other. It's really quite extraordinary. And the next one arose because this is slightly faceted, and then Andrew, if you want to talk about this and the faceting, it's quite beautiful.
Yes, not choosing to add any painted decoration on this one. The form is emphasized by just using this copper green glaze on the bowl. Very, very different from many other Hamada pieces.
And very beautiful. And now I think it's appropriate that we move to Tomoo's pieces. And if Rose, if you go back one, Andrew, if you would sort of move us into this piece, and then Tomoo maybe share some thoughts about it as well.
Yeah, this it's clear that Tomoo has put a great deal of emphasis into his manipulations of clay in more complex ways than either his father or his grandfather, while still maintaining many, if not nearly all of the materials that were used by his predecessors. And the handle of the lid on this piece shows that innovation, which is really not seen, is more complex than either Shoji or Shinsaku. And then if we can show this one, if you look at this is a very complex form. And I would love to hear Tomoo talk about his inspiration for this amazing form.
友さんの作品はお父様あるいはおじい様に比べて、形状が非常に複雑化しているという特徴があるようですが、この非常に複雑な、作品についてちょっとお話しいただければと思います。
私の作品は彫刻的な造形というものが特徴です。
One of the distinguished feature of my pieces is that very sculpting like shape. That is one of the characteristic of my pieces.
先ほどもちょっと話しましたが、益子焼の伝統は大切にしながらも、そこに、自由に、彫刻的な造形、を加えていくという、そういう仕事ですね。
So I do, as I talked to before, I really do emphasize the importance of the Mashiko's traditional way of making potteries, and I do put value in it, but then I put some more freedom in there to add some sculpting like shape on top of the tradition.
この形も自由に5つの形がスタッキングしていくという感じの感覚で造形をしました。
This, for example, I freely put 5 pieces together, stacking each other. That's how it came out, like this slide.
And we see on this piece, and on this piece as well, the next one and this one, that there is Tomoo's own personal, widely used or frequently used motif, which is a, if I remember from previous conversations is a shell shape, as in a seashell shape. You see it at the bottom of this piece and on a little bit, and then very clearly in red and green overglazed enamel on this one. So could Tomoo-san explain his choice of this shell motif to decorate?
これ貝殻のモチーフということなんですが、これについてちょっとお話しいただけますでしょうか。
はい。エナメルで筆で絵付けをする場合と、先ほどのソートグレーズのように彫りを入れて模様にする場合とあります。
So I have two ways of doing this, that you paint it afterwards with enamel, or you curve it and then like a salt glaze piece, they curve it. There's so two ways of doing it.
模様のモチーフはですね、その今ご指摘のように貝のようにも見えますし、花のようなイメージもあります。あまりこのモチーフに対する意味というものをはっきりとイメージするわけではないんですが、いずれにしても自然の世界の中のさまざまな美しいモチーフから来ています。
So this motif looks like a shell shape, but it could be flowers. I do not have too much meaning on these shapes, but I try to pick up the beauty out of the nature world. There's so many beautiful shapes and so many beautiful things in there.
I love this piece. Yeah.
この形はですね、日本では非常に、縁起が良いっていう言い方をしますが、米俵が3つ重なった形の壺ですね。俵型の壺ということです。
So this shape, actually, there's three rice barrel putting together. So it is a lucky, it's regarded as a lucky shape in Japan.
よく家が新しく建つときとかに、この米俵の形の壺をお祝いに注文をいただくことなどが多いです。
So, for example, when someone built a new house for him or her, they would like to order, they sometimes order this shape of bowls, or this shape of vase, or this shape of tsubo pot for the new house when they're building the new house, because it's lucky.
はい、米俵の意味には、その繁栄とか繁盛とか、そのとても良い、将来とても良い、グッドラックというか、そういうような意味合いが米俵の重ねたものに対する意味があります。
So this rice barrel means a prosperity. Basically, it's a good luck and for the future. That's what it means.
Let me just say briefly, with this one and actually the two previous ones, Tomoo, there's an enormous sense of delight and joy in each of the pieces, and the fact that you don't feel bound to one decoration or another makes them feel very spontaneous and lively at the same time, the decorations being appropriate for the piece rather than a consistent reuse of a specific motif, so that each of the pieces takes on both a sculptural form as well as a utilitarian form in the context of the tradition which you're still respecting.
So それぞれのその一つのモチーフにこだわるというよりも、そのいろんな形をその自発的にいろいろな形、いろいろなモチーフをお作りになっているようで、そこにはその喜びとエネルギーが満ち溢れているような気がします。
はい、ありがとうございます。
それと同時に、 それと同時にその伝統を非常に重んじているという気配も伺いますということです。
そうですね。本当にその通りです。
Yes, exactly what you said.
Okay, I hope you translated it correctly, but I'm going to go with it. Let's look at the next one. And Andrew, this is for you.
This is for me. I get to have this.
Well, it's not bad. If someone wants to give it to you, it's an amazing piece.
Yes, exactly. I mean, this really is pushing the boundaries of ceramic art. It's really amazing that Tomoo is coming from a relatively traditional background, family background, and certainly cultural background. If you look at Mashiko itself and its traditions, to create things that would be at home in the Museum of Modern Art, things that others have not even been able to imagine, much less execute. And this is really quite a wonderful example without any predecessors, at least in terms of a vessel for use that I can think of. I'd love to hear what Tomoo has to say about his thought process in creating this piece.
この非常に優れたというか驚くべき形の花瓶なんですけれども、友さんご自身が非常に伝統的な背景をお持ちになっていて、また文化的、益子のように文化的な伝統も持っている場所からいらした陶芸家にしてはこのような非常に珍しい素晴らしい形状を思いつくというのは、どういう、全く前例のない花瓶というものをお作りになって、これはどういうふうに、これをお作りになったとき、どういうふうなお考えでお作りになられたかをちょっとお聞かせ願いたいと思います。
さまざまな文化とかアートを、見る機会がありますし、そういう陶芸以外のさまざまなアートに非常に私は興味があります。そういった部分のものを陶芸に生かしてみて、生かすということで面白いことが起こらないかなと常に考えています。
So I have lots of chances to encounter with different types of art, not just the pottery, but the different types of art, and also and I'm very interested in those. And I'm always thinking that what sort of organic reaction would happen when I put this interest of myself of other arts into the pottery, and I like to see what happened afterwards.
これも、日本ではのし袋とかさまざまなお祝いに使うときに結ぶ紐を結ぶテクニックがあるんですけれども、その結び方はたくさんの結ぶテクニックと美しい形があって、そういったものを花瓶として使うデザインというのは生み出せないだろうかということで、これは2年か3年ぐらい前からスケッチを重ねましたね。
This shape, actually, you see in sort of happy occasions, people bring some gift, and then there are a way of tying the knot for the package, and then that's what it's based on. And I like to sort of create this shape based on this lucky way of knotting into the shape, and I really like to try. And I started maybe 2 or 3 years ago, I started to make lots of different sketches and see how I could make it into a vase.
まあ、もちろんこれ、壺の中身はすべて空洞になっていて、空洞がすべてつながっていて、花瓶としてしっかり機能します。
So this one, believe it or not, it can be used as a vase because everything is hollow inside. So you can put flower through the opening
まあ、
to the
例えば、
inside.
まあ、ワインを入れたらいいデキャンターリングのボトルになるかもしれません。
You could also put wine as a decanter, so you can use it as a decanter.
I love it.
I knew that people were going to want to know if it was actually hollow and could hold liquid on the inside. So I'm glad that he anticipated that and explained it for us. It's amazing.
In addition to which, it becomes yonobi. Certainly is the beauty of use if you're putting wine in it.
Sure.
We're going to end with this in a moment. I first want to thank Tomoo, Koi, especially Andrew and Mugi for being with us. Also to thank everyone who had stayed with us, because whenever we announce that it will be an hour long, we never take into consideration translation. So if it's an hour, it ends up being close to an hour and a half. I apologize for that. But I must say to all of you, what a joy and delight it has been just simply to learn from you. So Mugi, if you'd ask Tomo, if Andrew, you have a comment about this piece, it's a wonderful, it's a large, gracious piece. And it invites, I think, both use, but also just a sense of respect and awe for who created it. So Tomo, congratulations.
トモさん、この作品についてちょっと何か一言いただければと思うんですけれども。
はい、これは大きいボールですね。非常にスケールが大きいですけれども、釉薬は浜田庄司や浜田新作も使っていた、白い釉薬と黒い釉薬を混ぜる、上下で混ぜるスタイルで、まあ、これの大元は九州の唐津焼きに、見ることができます。
So this is a very large scale bowl, and the glaze is the white one, and white glaze and the black glaze. That's Hamada Shoji and Hamada Shinsaku used also, and then sort of they mix it at the top part of the pottery. And they actually you can see the similar pottery in Karatsu in Japan.
まあ、この白と黒の釉薬のミックスした釉薬に赤絵という表現をする陶芸家は多分私以外には見たことがないです。浜田庄司も浜田新作もしていないです。
As you see, this piece has a mix of white glaze and black glaze, but on top of it, it's an akai technique used. And I have Shoji Hamada and Shoji Hamada Shinsaku didn't use this technique at all. So as far as I know, I'm the only one in Japan to have white glaze and black glaze, and then on top of it, it's akai technique.
まあ、今までに誰もしていなかったような技法とか表現にいつもチャレンジしたいという、そういう気持ちで制作をしています。
I'm always trying to use the technique that nobody has used before, and that's sort of I put it as is my challenge when I create pottery.
まあ、これは中にたくさんのフルーツを入れてもいいし、花を生けてもいいですね。
In that case, you can put lots of fruits in there, or you can put flour actually in there.
あと3本ぐらいワインを氷と一緒に冷やしておくボウルにも使えます。
And you can put maybe 3 bottles of wine with ice cubes on it so that it will be chilled.
It's a wonderful offer. Thank him very much. I just want to end with this quote that I began with, which is actually from Shoji Hamada. And this conversation, I hope, really reaffirmed that the root may be firmly planted in tradition, but when it buds, when it branches out on the surface, it must be fresh and new. And it seems to me it's a perfect way to thank all three generations and for us to be privileged to share them with you this evening or this morning. So thank you very much for joining us. And hopefully you enjoyed it. I certainly did. And good night and good morning.